What's going on? Christ's communion foreshadowing, eating flesh and drinking blood from 2 weeks ago. Last week's we're all hypocrites. And this week he tests this woman's faith by equating her to a disgusting wild dog. Few were pets in those days. As well as giving a deaf-mute guy a wet willy, touching and spitting the unclean's unclean parts. Who is this toilet bowl licking, racial slur hurling, name calling, unclean cannibal? For the third week in a row, the gospel lectionary lesson has Jesus raising the bar to the untouchable. Me standing on Keith Tilton's shoulders kind of heights. Why is this Jesus so polar opposite of the meek and mild, long-haired, dirty blonde, European-looking Christ that we all grew up with in our Sunday school classrooms? Speaking of Sunday school, a minister was walking past a 5th grade classroom, and he decided to see what the kids were learning. "Joey," he asked, "who knocked down the walls of Jericho?" Joey said, "Don't look at me. I didn't do it." The minister looked at the teacher for an explanation. "Reverend, if Joey said he didn't do it, he didn't do it." The minister brought the story to session. And the elder for buildings and grounds said, "Reverend, listen, let's just fix the walls and take it out of the property budget." We all know we're a lot more like the man from this morning's gospel lectionary lesson, who lacked the physical ability to hear and speak. We're a lot more like him than we'd like to admit. Our ears and tongues work perfectly fine, but we suffer from a kind of spiritual deafness. Deafness of not listening. Or to put it another way, the deafness of physically hearing, yet failing to fully comprehend, to fully understand and come to grips with what is going on. A father and his daughter had a strained relationship. Returning from a trip, he did something that he had never done before. He presented his daughter with a beautiful necklace. Completely overcome with joy, the young girl ran with tears flowing from her eyes and dropped the necklace. She returned shortly to find that her new necklace was now around the neck of her infant baby sister. "Oh," said the father, "I went on and gave it to her. You didn't like it anyway." Oh, my friends, he wasn't listening. He wasn't listening. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." We hear these words of Jesus, but do we listen to them? Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." We hear these words of Jesus, but do we listen to them? Jesus taught us to pray, "Give us this day our daily bread." We hear these words of Jesus, but do we listen to them? Listening is a skill that we must learn to do. An elderly man stopped at a hearing aid center to ask about prices. The salesman said, "We have them from $25,000 on down to $1.50. "What's the $25,000 one like?" asked the elderly man. "Well, it translates into 3 languages and has all the latest in electronics," the salesman replied. "And what about the one that's only $1.50? the customer asked. "It's a button on a string," said the salesman, pushing it across the counter. "How does it work?" asked the customer. "It doesn't," said the salesman. "But if you put that button in your ear and the string in your pocket, you'll be surprised how loud people will talk." Wait, it gets better. Back at the old folks' home, the elderly customer was bragging about his new hearing aid. "I just purchased the most expensive hearing aid ever made," he said. "It is imported and it translates 3 languages." And his friend whispered, "What kind is it?" And the proud man looked down at his watch and he said, 2:05. Listen, as funny as that might have been, this isn't about hearing with your ear. It's about listening with the most expensive hearing aids ever made, hearing aids that were purchased with the blood of Christ. God's hearing aids, if you will. It's about listening to the heart and for the heart and with the heart of God. Several years ago, I got a call from a distraught mother telling me that her daughter had locked herself in her room and was threatening suicide. I immediately went to their house and talked the teenager out of her room and had all the family members sit down in an attempt to unscramble this mess. They all immediately started shouting at each other. Everybody was talking at the same time. This escalated things, so I asked if I could have the room and talk to their daughter. Once alone, I asked her, "Now what's the problem?" I'll never forget her answer. "My parents gave me everything I ever wanted. They've given me a new car. They send me to the best camps. They've given me all the clothes I ever wanted. They have even given me everything I ever asked for, except for the one thing I really wanted the most. Their love." Listen, they were so busy shouting at each other, shouting their precious sides across the room, that they could not listen to one another. Each of them became worse than the deaf and the mute man in the story this morning because they couldn't listen. They said things that didn't make any sense, and they said things that they really did not mean. Sadly, to this day, that family is hopelessly and tragically divided, and each member is living in a separate state. I'm happy to say that the girl blossomed when she got into college. She started studying what she really loved. She's now getting her PhD in psychology. Would you mind if I told you one of my favorite silly stories from years gone by? Thank you. At the end of their first date, a young man takes his favorite girl home. Emboldened by the night, he decides to try for that important first kiss. With an air of confidence, he leans his hand against the wall, smiling, and says, "Darling, how about a goodnight kiss?" Horrified, she replies, "Are you mad? My parents will see us." "Oh, come on," he says. "No, please," she says. "Can you imagine if we got caught?" "Oh, please," he continues. "Please, I like you so much." "No, no, and no. I mean no. I like you too. But I just can't." "Oh, yes, you can. Please?" "No, I just can't." "Please?" Out of the blue, the porch light comes on, and this girl's little sister shows up in her pajamas, her hair all disheveled. In a sleepy voice, the sister says, "Dad says go ahead and give him a kiss. Or I can do it. Or if need be, he'll come down himself and do it. But for crying out loud, tell him to get his hand off the intercom button." I'm sorry, Ruby, RJ, and Raina. I can't imagine how much funnier this story would be with today's video doorbells. The point that I want to lift up is the daughter's persistent no. And not just because I have two beautiful daughters and a pretty darn handsome son. It's as plain as day that the parents in this joke listened to their daughter because she obviously listened to them. Rich and Ashley and all parents, I pray that we all listen as intently to our daughters and our sons. There was a 5th grade teacher who decided to practice listening with her students. And so every morning for 5 minutes, she required them to be totally quiet and just listen. That's hard for any of us to do, much less 5th graders. But a great deal of good came from this exercise. She ended each listening exercise by asking the students if they heard anything. One time, a girl said, "I heard that I should be better to my parents." Who doesn't want to hear that? Another time, a boy said, "I heard that you should always be fair. When you are tagged and nobody sees it, you're still out. Friends, in our College of Elders season of discernment, we are in fact listening for God's will. We are checking our own desires, our agendas, our wills at the door, and listening for God's will. And that is not easy. That's why Jesus has been raising the bar for 3 weeks in a row. No, scratch that. The persistent, all-out spiritual war that we have on listening to God's will is why Jesus has raised the bar. That is why Jesus the Christ did in fact do all of that for you and for me. Whether with our friends, our family, or our whole church, or at work, or out there in the community, we must start listening to God's will. Because there will be a time when each and every last one of us is pushing hard on God's intercom button. If not on our behalf, certainly on behalf of someone that we love. And maybe, just maybe, on behalf of the church. At that moment, we will be thankful that we listened with the heart of God. Amen? Amen.